but
There we go.
all right.
Okay, I'm gonna just if your mic is not muted, I'm just gonna go ahead and mute it, just so we don't get any background noise. All right. So we are recording the session this evening. Again, if you have any questions throughout, Dawn's comfortable if you just want to put your hand up, and then we can kind of we can answer the questions as we go. Thank you for joining everyone this evening. I'm so genuinely happy to welcome Dawn back to this webinar. It's always a favorite. Um, Often around January, people start to ask about when is the World Symposium highlights and when is that webinar happening? Which just goes to say that I think it's one that maybe if we're not all on, we can always watch it later and we can always reference it. For those of you who don't know Dawn, which you may already recognize her from our Fabricast podcast, our webinars, and of course this webinar. Dawn is a genetic counselor in Atlanta, and she has a gift, and that gift is to translate complexity into clarity. The first time I ever heard Dawn speak, I thought, wow, I understand so much more now. So that's what she's going to do here at the World Symposium. We are in a 1 week kind of morning until evening sessions, and we're learning, and it's all scientific data. It's pretty dense, late-breaking research, and Dawn's going to bridge the gap between the science that we learned and then make it patient-friendly and just give some substance to our lived experience and help us make sense of it. So, Dawn, I'll pass it over to you, and we're looking forward to it.
Thanks, Julia. And Julia and Jack, who are on this call, were both at World, and Donna, they were all at World. So if I've left out something that was your favorite, jump in there and tell me so we can talk about it that too. So
Okay, you bet.
I just picked stuff that I thought would be interesting to you guys and that I found particularly interesting. And then, there's a ton that happens in Fabry disease at this meeting, so I can't cover it all, but I tried to get some stuff that I thought would be useful. All right. Are you seeing my screen, the big screen?
Yes.
All right, awesome. Okay, so as Julia so lovely said, I'm Dawn Laney. I'm a genetic counselor and associate professor at Emory in the Department of Human Genetics, and I have the privilege of working almost exclusively in Fabry disease. So when I go to the meeting, I'm looking for what matters to you, and hopefully this translates in as I go through these things. Here are my disclosures. Um, I basically will talk to anybody about Fabry disease who would like to talk to me about Fabry disease. So that's what you see here is I'm doing studies and I'm talking to people and I'm trying to get grants so I can do more studies in Fabry disease. And that's kind of what's happening in there. My goal here is to really summarize some key pieces of information that I found out at World. And some of that includes just what it's like having Fabry disease and what people are trying to learn about Fabry disease. And part of it is these are new therapies that we're learning about. And some of it is more good information about the therapies we're already able to access. So that's kind of what I'm going for here. Just to remind you that for me, the best part about our meetings is watching your advocates in action. So when someone from the Canadian Fabry Association or National Fabry Disease Foundation or FSIG or FIN goes to this meeting, they have a zillion meetings where they're trying to advocate and figure out how you can get better support in the Fabry organizations, but also share your lived experiences. And one of my favorite things is I was walking to a meeting and I looked across the hall and there was a zillion people all lined up. But in the front was this panel and it had Julia and it had Mary from Finn and it had Uma Ramaswamy and it had Sabina, I think. And it was this amazing panel of these strong women with Fabry disease and a doctor who really believes in taking the best care of women with Fabry disease. And they were talking about their experiences and things they knew and things that people need to think about. And I have to tell you, it was just powerful and amazing. And I was so glad, even though I didn't get to stay for the whole session, but I got to experience a piece of that. So just know that they're moving and shaking for you. And we stand in front of the sign and take pictures a lot. It's central. This year, I want to take you to World. Not everybody gets to go to World, but I want you to kind of get the atmosphere and the feeling of what it's like to go to this giant meeting. We're in a hotel. We're in a kind of a ballroom that they've transformed into a meeting room. And there are seats up front where you can sit with tables and the seats in the back where you can sit in the chairs. And I'm just going to take you there so you can experience it for yourself. The other thing that happens is every night there's a poster session where people stand and you can talk to them about your work. And the curse and also the privilege is that there's so many posters, it's so hard to get through them. And particularly if you want to talk to somebody specifically about a poster, it can be really hard to get through them all. But
Mm.
you can kind of sneak in and do it all day long. That one poster is only up for a day, so you got to go quick and you got to learn fast. Um, so sometimes you feel like, wow, there's not enough of me to make it through here. One thing I like about this picture that you see of everybody sitting in the giant ballroom is these are all genetic counselors who specialize in Fabry disease or other lysosomal storage diseases. And this is in a break, that's why we're all chatting. But I just love that we, over time, all the different institutions kind of clustered together to learn and to be near each other so we could ask questions about what we were watching with research. So it's not all, tough work. We get 15-minute breaks every now and then. Diving right into what we've learned. One of the things that I thought was really interesting this year, not just it was my poster, because I was really representing a large group of people, and Elena Lim, who also is a genetic counselor at Emory, was a survey talking to you guys, women with Fabry disease in US and Canada. And I was interested to see, this was data that had information on the men too, but this poster was focused on women. It was interesting to see that a lot of the symptoms that women report are ones that are really hard to measure. And the only way to measure them is to ask and to use those questionnaires that everybody loves filling out about pain, about quality of life, and about things like gastrointestinal, diarrhea, constipation stuff. But I thought it was interesting because, back in the day when they were telling us that women didn't have symptoms, I think part of it is you couldn't measure them. And I'm here to tell you that these symptoms that are getting reported are absolutely things that are hard to measure. And we just have to trust and listen to people and really understand what they're living with. Um, One of the barriers to care is that if you can't measure it, sometimes it's hard to get the right monitoring and it's hard to get the right management and treatment. And that's kind of what was underlined in this poster, is we still have a long way to go to do a better job understanding what women are going through and how best to monitor it and how best to treat it. So I think that's really important to underline. And then Elena is working on a poster. Didn't have any data. It was just talking about what was happening. And it was like, we've noticed that people who are not white have a hard time sometimes um, accessing the care and the monitoring they need. And why is that? And so she's going to go in and she's going to do a unique survey that focuses on barriers to care and people who are not white. And part of this is because they're underserved. And part of it, in Georgia is that we are very much a rural state. In Atlanta, we're a city, but other than that, people are relying on the health department for a lot of their care, and they're not as able to get to Emory, which is where we can get them the best care possible. But how are we helping people who are rural and who aren't white get the best care possible? So stay tuned to next year. She'll give us actual data there. This was a great one. One of FSIG's, which is Fabry Support and Information Group's most active pods is the Testing for Tots group, and they're agitating in the United States to get newborn screening on all the state panels because, kind of like in Canada, you've got Providence that determine who is doing newborn screening for what and how you're going to do it. And at the United States, every state decides what they're going to test for newborn screening. And you can see on this poster that Rachel Ellen, who's a mover and a shaker in there, anything that's colored is in the works. Either they're doing Fabry testing, they've decided to do Fabry testing on newborns, or they're getting close. And the poster that she put together explained why Fabry qualifies for newborn screening. And part of it is things like there's a treatment and there's a good test, but part of it is that symptoms start really early enough that it's important to detect them in newborns. And so that whole big orange square that you see her hand showing us is all the criteria that make something qualify for newborn screening or not, and how Fabry meets all those criteria. So I thought it was a really nice exercise into why is it important to get diagnosis early, and how does newborn screening fit into the Fabry diagnostic odyssey. One of the things that I always think about with newborn screening for Fabry is you're not just finding one person, you're typically finding at least 6 people within a family who have Fabry disease as well. because Fabry is a whole family condition. Now, this is an audience interactive one, and I want you to either yell it out or put it in the notes. But what is the easiest way to find a patient who has Fabry disease? Easiest. What can we find so easy, like falling off a log? What do you think? I kind of give the answer here, but right, it's testing family members, right? If you are looking for Fabry disease, let's go to a family that's living with Fabry disease because there's probably some members who have not yet been diagnosed. And there was a pilot that was done in the UK. And what they looked at is they said, okay, we believe that looking at family members and helping them access testing is the best way to find out who needs monitoring care when they have Fabry disease. Makes sense. But they found there's barriers, like people not wanting to get tested or people feeling that getting diagnosed or tested means that they are somehow less than, or worried about insurance or family dynamics, as we all know, is always exciting for all of our families. Like no matter whether you have Fabry or not, there can be a cousin who's like, nope, I don't have anything to do with the rest of you guys, and I don't want to hear about it. Or there's someone who's a mother hen who really tries to get as many people tested as possible so they can get the best help and care possible. So the UK is going to try something different. And I don't know if you guys have had your doctors ever do this in the UK and in Canada, but they are actually doing a pilot where if the person with Fabry disease allows them, that person is going to reach out to all the family members that they've got contact information for. Now, in the US, we can't really do this because we have privacy laws that prevent us from doing it. But in France, you're legally required to contact all the family members when someone's diagnosed with Fabry disease. So the UK is going to try their version of it and see how it goes. I don't know how to feel about it exactly. I feel like absolutely we want to catch everybody and we want to help the person who gets diagnosed interact with everybody. But I don't know about cold calling family members and talking to them about getting tested. I mean, I'm not shy, but I don't know. Maybe just I've spent too much time with the privacy laws in the US. It just feels like it's an invasion of privacy, but for a good cause. So I don't know. We'll have to think about that. If you have any thoughts on that, put that in the chat for sure. We'll talk about some. Nadine Henderson, who is an amazing genetic counselor who's been working in Fabry disease longer than me, emailed me probably about 6 months ago. And she's like, Dawn, I have two patients who suddenly lost hearing in one ear. Like maybe they had a cold and then their head was stuffed up and then suddenly they couldn't hear at all out of one ear. And she said, well, have you ever had that? And I was like, sure, I have. Like, we've had probably like 4 people who've had that happen. And she's like, what have you done? And so some people take oral steroids. They go straight to the doctor as soon as it happens. They get pill steroids. Some people end up, if that doesn't work, they get a shot of steroids into their eardrum. Ow, but works sometimes. And then other people have gone into these oxygen chambers, hyperbariatric chambers, same thing you use for healing wounds and things. And they go in that to see if it helps with their hearing loss. Variable outcomes, right? So Nadine's two patients, neither of them had full return of hearing, but one of them did have some return of hearing after using steroids and the injectable steroids and the thing. I've had one lady who's had it happen 3 or 4 times. And she's always had return of most of her hearing each time because she runs immediately to get steroids. I've had one person who didn't ever get their hearing back in that one ear. One thing that was interesting about the 2 cases Nadine had is they were younger individuals. So they were in their 20s. My folks tend to be a little bit older, not old, but like 40s and 50s. They have their hearing loss. But we don't understand it. And the important thing that she was doing here is bringing up this awareness and then getting other cases from other centers. And I think she's going to publish something on it. So we can talk about, we don't know why it happens, but sometimes it seems to happen when you've got a cold or an illness beforehand and then it happens. Sometimes just have it come out of nowhere. It doesn't seem to be associated with dizziness or mini strokes or anything like that. But it's something we need to think about more because you've got like the progressive hearing loss over time for some people with Fabry disease, but what about this sudden loss of hearing? So it's just something that Nadine's brought awareness to, and she's going to keep bringing awareness, and we'll try to, once we define the problem, then we can start to try to fix it, right? So let's define it, and that's what she's working on. So I thought this was really interesting. Jack, I didn't know you were going to be on the call, but here you are. This was a cool poster. I believe this was partially supported by Chiesi, but there's this meeting slash thing called True Faces of Rare that they were doing over in the UK and kind of around Europe. And what they did is they had a big meeting and they asked people questions. They asked health providers, they asked patients. They said, when you see materials like educational materials, do you like to see a stock photo or you like to see somebody who has that condition? And the overwhelming response was, we would like to see somebody who has that condition, please. And then the why of it is that they feel more supportive when you're seeing a material, an educational material that shows somebody who has Fabry disease or other conditions. And if you see somebody who looks like you, not so much in Fabry disease, although we have a little similarity when you look at our men, right? It can help you feel like, there's somebody out there like you, even if it's just a visual picture of their face. And the other thing they said, though, is you need to be very careful about how you show it because some people have a lot of changes in their face. For example, a condition called Treacher-Collins. They can have like displaced ears and their eyes look different and their nose looks different, their face looks different. So you want to take it in a way that's, showing them as looking wonderful and looking happy or not happy. Like not everybody needs to look happy in a brochure about having a condition that's chronic, but really trying to be respectful about somebody who's got a condition and how they look. And so I picked two of our beautiful faces of rare that I found good Google images on. And I particularly like that Julia was up against a log cabin because, it's atmospheric. And Jack's got all of his ideas coming out of his heads. I thought it was good. If you do not know Mary Pavlov, she is amazing. She is currently the president of the Fabry International Network, and Julia and Jack get to spend lots of time with her. I don't get quite as much quality time, but she just has a great approach to life, and she just says things as they are, which you absolutely need a president of the international organization. And this is a poster that she was really involved with. Um, and I don't want you to read all these tiny little things, right? There's too much in here. But basically, it's saying that there are still ways that we're having problems communicating between patients and providers, and particularly about things like mental health. And it happens all the way from diagnosis to talking to families about getting treated to treatment and then disease management. There's still gaps that we need to fill in. Some of that's communication, and some of that is more about being empathetic and understanding where people are coming from and not just saying, oh, you're non-compliant, but really understanding they're not non-compliant, what's really going on when it comes to something like enzyme replacement therapy. And then trying to think of collaborative between the healthcare providers and the patients and the families. How do we all like communicate better? And there's some recommendations they made. And one big part is exactly what we're doing here, which is making sure that the advocacy groups foster that communication, help people understand what's new and different and happening within the disease space and what's happening with treatment, and making sure that there's the emotional support. And, I've always been in awe of Jack and Julia and Jerry and Mary and how they put together these amazing programs that not only give information, but also bring people together in ways that make them feel less alone and make them feel that other people understand without even having to talk about it, what's going on. So kudos to you guys. And this poster here just emphasized that whole point. Okay, let's go Canadian for a minute. Many of you, if not all of you, at some point in your life has been part of the Canadian Fabry Disease Initiative. This was really the way to access treatment back in the day. And when this started in 2007, they were really focused on, you were getting randomized for treatment to either agalsidase beta, which is Fabrazyme, or agalsidase alpha, which is Replagal. And then they every year monitored what was going on with different things that tells us, all the different biomarkers, all the different labs, all the different studies. And this is a way to get everybody therapy, or not everybody, but to get as many people as possible therapy, right? In 2017, it stopped though, and it became a optional initiative, something you could opt into. And then it became the CFDI National Registry. So it's not required, it's just encouraged because this is how we learn about Fabry disease. And particularly if you live in Canada, this is a great way to help us understand better. Or as I like to think about it, help the detectives get the data so they can figure some stuff out. Throughout what we're looking at here, as I go through some things, you're going to see that CFDI or CFDAR, and you'll know that that is your hard work, that your blood, sweat, tears, and pee went directly into that. As we look here, one of the posters we did from Emory this year, but also one that came from your Fabry, your Canadian Fabry industry, initiative for the registry, is learning from those who have passed away. Um, Not a cherry study set, but one that I think is really important because it shows us how things have changed with treatment and how things haven't changed with treatment. And we've got a couple different posters that talk about things like this. At Emory, we had 31 patients who'd passed away, 22 of them who had moderate severe Fabry disease when they started therapy. And so we wanted to look at this group specifically to see what we need to do to help people more. Because I feel like what we're looking at with Fabry disease is now we have different groups of people that we're working with. I particularly, because I mostly see patients that I've seen long term, a lot of my patients are older now. So they're in their 60s, they're in their 70s, they're in their 50s, and they started treatment when they had a lot of damage already from Fabry disease before they started treatment. So I wanted to understand better when some of these folks passed away, what do we need to do to prevent that? And if we can't prevent it, what do we need to think about more? And the answer is always heart, right? Heart. But one of the things that I found that really stood out to me, it's not the traditional like, oh, congestive heart failure because of a big heart. It's not arrhythmias kind of thing. It's moved into heart valves being a problem. So we don't ever think about heart valves for a long time with Fabry disease. We just kind of, you got a little regurgitation here, a little regurgitation there. But what we found with multiple of our patients is that their aortic valve can suddenly get a lot worse. So what happens is, you kind of feel tired because of Fabry disease. Some of the people who'd had kidney transplants, some people who just, over time, their heart has worsened. Suddenly they get just excruciating fatigue that comes out of nowhere. So much worse than it had been. So it's like if you've got Fabry fatigue and then you toss the flu on top of it, right? It's really bad. And then shortness of breath and inability to walk for any distance at all. And what they found in at least 3 people was that their cardiac valves had gone from moderate, which they don't necessarily need therapy for, to severe or profoundly compromised. And one of the people, their valves was so far gone that they couldn't even get at their treatment to repair that valve, which is what you do. I mean, if you've got a bad aortic valve, they just surgically give you a new one, whether it's a pig valve or whether it's a mechanical one, they give you a new one. But with Fabry disease, because we've got so many things going on, if your heart is too enlarged, it can be really hard to go in there and put a new valve in. Because a new valve can make all the difference and give you your energy back and help you feel better and decrease some of that heart failure stuff. So I think we need to pay more attention to that. And I noticed that cardiac MRIs tell us much better than echoes. Echoes miss that progression. Cardiac MRIs do not. Um, we also know somebody who didn't pass away, who is in the Fabry community and very open about this, but they had a rapid progression of valve disease and they had to have it repaired as well. But the timing was such that, he recovered and did really well after it. So something we need to look at. The other thing is infection. You'll see both in the paper we did and the one that came from the Canadian Fabry Disease Initiative, sepsis. So neuropathic feet, when you start having nerve damage, it's really hard to cure. It's really hard to heal them up once you've got wounds or if you had surgery on them. And it just becomes easier to get an infection, easier to have an infection that then results in an amputation, things like that. And some of that is related to edema that's never treated. So if you've got a lot of edema in your feet, and at least 2 or 3 of our people had this progression happen. And I think what we need to do is look a lot deeper into that swelling, that edema of the feet, and treat it then. And then do almost like people with diabetes do more foot checks and make sure that we're more aware of what's happening with feet when your nerves are all gone and you can't feel your feet anymore. So that's something that was really important to look at. And then always we need more treatment for depression, anxiety, and the things that come along with Fabry disease, but then become more significant as you're feeling worse, right? If physically you're feeling a lot worse and you can't do the things you normally do, then also the depression, anxiety is going to be worse. So we need to work on that. And basically everything I just said is right down here with our good friend Dr. West as well, who presented this poster. We got to pay attention to the heart. We got to look out for sepsis, which is just a massive infection of the body. Stroke did pop in there. So you see 14% stroke. Cancer, not as part of Fabry disease, but cancer that just happens, right? So I had several patients. One had pancreatic cancer. One had Uh, so he had had a kidney transplant, and when you have kidney transplant, you go on anti-rejection medications. And if you go on anti-rejection medications and you go out in the bright sun, which we have a lot in Georgia, you can get melanoma. And so he passed away from melanoma, which was related to his transplant medications, which is related to Fabry, but you know, it's not that Fabry caused it. It's just this cascade of things caused it. So that's something to watch out for as well. And then in Canada, you have something that we don't have in the US, which is the medical assistance in dying and withdrawal of care. And Dr. West and his poster really showed that this was people who were very far in their disease progression, and they chose to do medical assistance in dying. And then there were some that had suicide. So it all goes right back to that depression, anxiety I was talking about before. So again,
John,
yeah.
there's a question. Have the reasons for Fabry deaths changed over time now that there is treatment?
Mhm. They have. And I think part of that is that you see the malignancy. Cancer was never a problem in Fabry disease for a very sad reason. People didn't live long enough to get age-related cancers. And some of the heart things that we see, we have to think again about taking care of our cholesterol in ways that when people were passing away in their 40s, we didn't have to worry about. So we have to think about everything that's happening to everybody else as they get older and think about it in Fabry as well. So that was a great question. And the answer is, yep, because we're living longer, we got to start thinking about things that are problems in your average person as well. So, and you can also see that kidney failure used to be a stronger reason for passing away in Fabry. That used to be the number one cause, and it is gone now. And sudden death from arrhythmias is gone down now too, because people are paying more attention to getting pacemakers and doing tests that monitor the rhythm. So hopefully you don't have as many arrhythmias. Yeah, Russia.
Well, hi. When I just in your first bullet point there, treatment is helping those who began therapy
Mm.
even with moderate severe Fabry disease. When you say the begin the therapy, do you mean the enzyme replacement therapy?
Mhm.
Is that what
It,
you're
it, it could be enzyme, it could be Galafold. This particular one, because these were patients who were older, it was all enzyme replacement therapy. And that
okay.
just has to do with the timing of treatment and when they passed away. So when we look at these 31 patients, I counted everybody I've ever seen who passed away that was one of my patients. So this would be people who died as soon as I started in 2003 and had like a year of therapy. This would be people who died, last month. So it's kind of a cross section of people all across. The only thing that's really consistent is they all had pretty progressed Fabry disease before they started therapy.
Okay, but just if I could ask a question a different way. So you mean like Fabry specific therapy?
Yes, yeah,
Yeah, oh, okay,
yeah.
thanks.
Sorry, I didn't make that clear. This is all Fabry specifics therapy. So when they started like primary therapy for Fabry, not when they started like a kidney transplant or anything like that. We didn't count
Yeah.
that because some of these folks already had a kidney transplant, at least one. Some of them had a couple. Um, So, but again, these were all people who had classic Fabry disease, and these are all folks who, were, 30 plus when they started therapy.
I think.
Yeah, good questions. All right. All right, let's talk about therapy. Let's talk about what we learned in the world of world this year. There's different ways that scientists are kind of approaching how to help figure out what's happening and how to treat. The one that is most famous, of course, would be our enzyme replacement therapies, where we just give back in your arm the enzyme or your port, the enzyme that you're not able to make enough of. There's also our famed chaperone therapies. So our FDA approved one down here is Galafold. And that's, I think, the only one you guys have too. And its job is for people who have amenable mutations. So they have mutations in the gene that makes a protein that's misfolded or something's different about it, but it's present enough that you can use that chaperone to get it to the right shape, get it through your body, into the lysosome, break down what it needs to do, and get out of there. So not everybody could take the current chaperone therapy that we have that's approved. There are other people working on different kinds of chaperone therapy that might be able to take more people into the fold taking this pill therapy, but we'll see. There's other things that the whole goal is to try to get all of the things that would build up because of the enzyme deficiency. I like to think of it as like an interstate. If there's a big traffic jam, we're trying to get off on all the surface streets, the local streets before they get to the traffic jam. That's what they're doing here for the substrate reduction therapy. They're trying to get all the molecules that would have built up and made the yucky GL3 bio things, and take them off and get them broken down other ways. So before they get behind the blockage and cause problems. That's substrate reduction therapy. And then of course there's like gene therapy that is the same principle as enzyme, give back what you're missing in different ways, but just giving you enzyme that you needed. And there's other things they're working on too. So what's our goal in fab rate therapy? Well, our goal is to get what we call globotriacylceramide and globotriacylsphingomide, GB3 and lyso-GB3. Our goal is to get that gunk down because this is the stuff that builds up because you're missing the enzyme to break down a big molecule. So the things that build up, lyso-GB3 and GB3. We want to go from when you first are on no therapy to therapy, we want to go down, shooting like a cannonball down, right? And then once you've been on therapy a while, it's pretty much just going to stay the same, right? So if your therapy is working, it's going like this. If you're on therapy and suddenly you have a steep curve up, like you're going up a mountain, then we know there's a problem. Your therapy is not working the way that it should because all that gunk is building back up again when we measure it in your blood. And when we measure these biomarkers in your blood, we don't know where it's all coming from. It's coming from different parts of your body, but we don't know if one's a little bit higher from the liver, a little bit from the kidney, a little from the heart. We don't know. We just call the total sum of your body and we watch it as like just one sign of what's going on with someone with Fabry disease. So it's not perfect. And it does wiggle a little bit. Wiggles are okay. It's just when it goes like all the way up or all the way down. That's when you got to figure out what's happening. And it never goes all the way down unless you're on a treatment that's working. So up, that can happen for many reasons. We also want to see your Fabry specific symptoms. So like pain in your hands and feet that burns, fatigue, diarrhea. We want to see that go down, right? So down with the biomarkers, down with the Fabry symptoms. When we look at how your kidney works, we measure two things a lot. One was protein in your urine. That's when the protein's getting through the filter of your kidney too much and it's coming out in your pee. And then that protein poisons your kidney. So we don't want that. So we want protein levels down, and that's protein in your urine. And eGFR is kind of a funny measurement. It's another one of those blood measurements. It tells us how fast or how well your kidneys are filtering things. So it's estimated glomerular filtration rate, but it's really just a guesstimate. It's based on your blood plus your weight plus some other things. But we want eGFR. Once you hit about 30, eGFR goes down in anybody, like at about around, we call it 0.6 to 1.07, but think of it being like around 1, and it just goes down gradually. And even if you're to be 90 or 100, it's gradual enough you wouldn't necessarily be in kidney failure from it. When you have Fabry disease, particularly if you've got classic Fabry disease, at certain times in your life, it starts shooting down like it's on a toboggan, right? It's like, shoom, and we don't want that. So what we want to see with a treatment that's working is the eGFR going down the same as it would if you were an average person. Or if it gets a little bit better, we're all for that too. But generally our goal is to make it go down just like as if you were an average person who's going to be 100 and not have kidney failure. So when we look at kidneys, we want protein down. We want eGFR to be going down a little bit, like an average person. Stable would be fine. We'd be happy with stable in Fabry disease. And then heart, we do a bunch of different measurements, but when we look at studies, the one they like the most is this left ventricular mass index. I just want you to think of that as being like a big bottom chamber of the heart. We want it to be smaller. We don't want it to be bigger because it's bigger, your muscle's working too hard and it's got storage and it's got scarring and things like that. So when you see LVMI, just think of it as be like, okay, we want the heart to be at least stable and not getting worse, or we want it to get a little bit better. Does that make sense? These are touch points because when we talk about each of these therapies, I want you to think like, okay, we want biomarkers down, we want symptoms down, we want protein down. We are okay with eGFR being a little bit down, but just a little bit like an average person, and we want the heart size down. So that gives us a touch point as we talk about therapies. Danielle Bichet, one of my favorite doctors. He did a study that was part of the registry that you guys are part of, the CFDI, and he looked at people in migalastat and he said, okay, we know people have been taking migalastat. How's it working for Canadians? And they had 66 patients, and some of them had been on enzyme and then switched, and some of them had had no treatment before. And these are all people who were what we call amenable, so we know their gene change works well with the chaperone therapy, so it should be okay. And what they found is that when these folks were either, if they were on enzyme before, then their plasma GB3 just stayed constant, which is what we want to see. And if they'd never been on anything before, no main Fabry treatment, then their GB3 went down. Yay, that's what we want. Remember, we want GB3 biomarkers down. Good. And then when they looked at the EGFR, it stayed stable or down like an average human. And the left ventricle mass stayed stable. So it didn't get worse, which is fine. Good. We like stable. They did still find that some what we call Fabry clinical events, that's just a nice term for kidney failure or heart problems like surgery that requires surgery or stroke or death. Some people did still have some clinical events, but it was only in 25% of individuals. And when we talk about 25%, that sounds like, whoa, 25%, we don't want to have any issues. Well, we didn't control who was going on Galafold who already had some health problems and had, those continuing or new, but their Fabry had been progressed. So, 25% is fine. They're just telling us. They're like, here's what happened too. So on any primary therapy, we don't stop these events from happening all the time unless we started really, really early. And I got some posters for you coming up on that. Keeping on the chaperone theme, there's a study called the Aspire study that is just starting here. I think it's international, but it's for kids who are less than 12. And they're trying to figure out if the chaperone dose is the same 123 milligrams every other day that we use for adults, or if it needs to be different, and if it seems to be safe and effective. So they're doing a liquid, so you don't have to swallow a pill for this. We don't have any data yet, but they just did a poster reminding us that it was happening. Sometimes they do that. They just give us posters to say like, hey, this is happening. One of the things with chaperone therapy that's on the package is that if your kidneys are not doing so well, they don't want you to take chaperone therapy because we don't know the right dose, right? Because if your kidney clears chaperone therapy like Galafold and your kidneys aren't clearing things that well because your kidneys aren't working as well, then how do we know that it doesn't hold on to that megalostat too long? Because if you hang out with megalostat too long, it starts inhibiting your body's ability to break down the gunk that it needs to break down, specifically a GL3 and the GL3 and the lysosome. So they are doing a study looking at taking a reduced, taking it different ways, right? So either you take it one every 4 days, you take a pill every 7 days, you take a pill every 14 days.
Okay.
So this particular one, they're just started to do this to look at the data, and the first thing they saw is that the Galafold, the chaperone therapy, is not hanging around too long. So when they say insufficient drug accumulation, that's a fancy way of saying it doesn't hang around in the body too long, causing problems. So we don't know, is it working wonderfully yet? We don't know that, but all we know is that it's not sticking around too long. So that's a good thing that we've learned so far. We'll get more later, but so far that's what they've told us. Another registry, again, registries they don't have any specific treatment in them. Registries are really all about looking the long term over people with a certain thing. So like the Fabry International Registry, that one takes anybody on whatever medication or no medication, and then just whatever information they have, you put in that registry. The Follow Me with Amicus, people, it's kind of a mixed bag too, but mostly it's people who are on Galafold. And they did this analysis for people who've been on Galafold or megalostat for 5 years. And they were amenable, and they had GFR that wasn't too low. Like they had all these rules that I didn't put on this slide because it just gets messy if you have too much stuff. But just trust me on this, they're amenable. So it's not like we're putting people on that couldn't benefit from it. And they said, tell us about this. If we look at the Follow Me registry, this is kind of like the one they did in the Canadian registry, right? How are things looking? And looking at my arrows, you can see that their EGFR stayed at a rate that we'd expect to see in the average human. So negative means it's going down a little bit. But remember, around 1 is okay, right? We're doing okay at 1. The men, it was a little higher at 1.5, but again, we'll take 1.5 over 2s and 3s and 4s, right? So we'll take that. So that's nice and stable is what we're saying there. And then they looked at the size of that heart, that LVMI I told you about, which is kind of looking at the big size of the heart. That went down a little bit, which is lovely. We like it going down a little bit. But basically stable. So what we can see here is that over about 5.7 years for all the individuals who are on this medication, it kept it stable, which is great. This is good. We like stability. We like getting better, even better, but that's hard to picture when we're putting all this data together, because this data, you have to remember, those like it's a combination of some people who did really well, some people didn't do as well, and most people in the middle. So whenever we look at these treatment studies, I want you to remember that there's somebody who didn't do well, and it's not the fault of the medication. And there's somebody who did really well, and it's not necessarily the fault of the medication. Like everybody reacts to things differently. Okay, so how about our friend Lisa Berry, who's a genetic counselor at Cincinnati, she got together with some other folks and made this poster looking at how does enzyme replacement therapy, what does it look like these days? So ask in US and Canada and ask about people who are on enzyme replacement therapy. How do they start? When do they stop? How do they make decisions about what they're doing? And we didn't get a huge amount of information about this, but if you want to hear more about the data, she's actually giving a webinar with National Fabry Disease Foundation on March 9th. So if you're excited about this poster, feel free to dive in and hear more from Lisa directly. When they looked at who did the study, over a little bit of half of people were on enzyme replacement therapy. Most people were on Fabrazyme and gasidase beta. And then about 8% were on Replagal and gasidase alpha, and 9.7 were on pegyunidase alpha, which is Elfabrio, which is our latest enzyme replacement therapy. Most people did incredibly well. Greater than 80% got their infusions every 2 weeks, like they're supposed to. And they did a nice job, and they only missed it because of a school conflict or a vacation or a work conflict. So good on everybody. Like everybody's did really well there. There were a couple people, about 27.3, who when they did this study were not on enzyme anymore. And some of that's because they switched to chaperone therapy. So good, still treated, just moved to the pill because they qualified. Some people stopped because they felt like their Fabry was getting worse on enzyme, and some people thought their infusions were too long. So you can see a couple different reasons, but those were the biggest ones. And then some people who'd never been on therapy, there was a bunch of different reasons they had never started. And I'm sure that you guys can think of some. But it was just interesting to see what's happening with enzyme at this point. Okay, so how does early treatment impact Fabry? I'm going to hit on this one for a little bit longer than some of the other ones, so there'll be multiple slides on the same thing. My student, that's Lauren. She's been working hard. She looked at patients across the United States and Canada who were 18 or younger when they started enzyme replacement therapy. And she asked them just straight out, tell us what you're thinking. How are you doing this? And then we got records to measure labs too. So most people who started enzyme replacement therapy when they're 18 or younger said that they had improvement of some or all of their symptoms that were there when they started. And then 93.7 felt that the ERT positively changed their disease progression. So that's pretty cool. And that's them telling us. That's not us like looking at them. That's like them telling us. And then you can look down here and see when we ask them specifically about particular symptoms, in what ways did things help or not help. So you can see those big yellow bars. Those are where they just felt the same before therapy and on therapy. But those big blue bars are when things got better. And I love seeing those. But there is some little bits you see here with the diarrhea and the neuropathic pain, and then the angiokeratomas where you see the red bars. And the red bars is they felt they got worse. Again, these are those symptoms that are harder to measure. Angiokeratomas, right, easier. Diarrhea, a little bit easier if you ask the right questions. But again, things that are harder to measure. The Fabry registry, they did an even bigger version of this study, right? They looked at people under 16 who started therapy and what symptoms do they have about 6 years after therapy. Most of the people got symptoms they started when they were around age 7 based on the registry data, and they started treatment when they were about 11. So there's a gap between when they started having symptoms and when they started treatment, which I think is something we need to close if we want the best outcomes. Their biomarkers went down. Yay! That's what we want, right? Down. This is really busy, but I think really important. And the stars tell us the important things. If somebody already had pain, the top part with the blues and oranges is men. The bottom part with the pinkish, reddish, and green, those are girls. If you look at them and they had pain before they started enzyme, only 10% for the men and 14% for the women had no pain. And that tells us we need to start therapy before there's daily pain. And even then, you can see that people who had no pain, 14%, in the men, only 4% went to them continuing to have no pain. About 10% went down to have pain after even having therapy. So we are not able to treat it enough once you've had pain, is what we've learned from this. And I think the take-home message is we need to start earlier, and we need to start without that gap between when they started having symptoms and when they got treated. But the good story is here in the middle, pain crisis, from the excruciating, horrible pain that makes you feel like you get out of the hospital or you just don't want to touch or talk or anything. Most of the kids who started had not ever had that pain crises. And even those who did, 9% of them, or sorry, 15% of them got better. So what we're doing is doing a good job for pain crisis. Is it helping everybody? No, but it's a lot down. So that tells us that we may not be able to help the daily pain, but if we can get rid of those excruciating, horrible, immediate pain crises that come out of nowhere, that's a good thing. And then belly pain, similar story, got much better. Not everybody, mind you, but the kids who started out with having a lot of belly pain, 25% of them got better and then reported none after treatment for a while. Now, some of those who didn't have pain in the beginning did develop it over the years on therapy, but even it's less than what we started with. So I think the take-home message here is that we're getting early enough in these kids treated under 16 to help with the horrible pain, but we're still not getting rid of some of the abdominal pain, still not getting some of the burning pain. And I think the way to solve that is start earlier. These were kids when they started, right? They were under 16. So how many of them had anything happen? Well, the answer is like big stuff, right? Like kidney failure, like strokes, all that bad stuff we talked about earlier, right? So for the most part, they did really, really well. They haven't had any of these things yet. And some of these folks are in their 30s now. Some of these folks are in their 40s. So it's a good thing that they're not having the big stuff. On the ones who did have something, some of them had angina, that's that heart pain. One of them had AFib and tachycardia, so when your heart rhythm gets off, right? One person did have that. Nobody had renal failure or bad or kidney transplant or dialysis. Nobody or let's see, no kidney, some heart, and then 5 people had what we called the cerebrovascular events. So that counts that includes a TIA. So. But if we look at it again, the first time they had one of these events, for most people was in their 20s, and the range was between 15 or 16 and 20 when they had this happen. But again, most people didn't have anything happen. So that's a good sign, because more than would have it happen if they hadn't started therapy when they did. I don't want you to think I'm going to leave out Replagal. Egalcitate alpha or Recbel had this amazing paper on their 20 years of data, basically, and people who've been on therapy a long time. And if you look on average, look at all these people, you guys. That's so many data points. And you can see, like I said, some people are up here doing so well. Some people are down here not doing so great. But on average, people's kidney function improved and then traveled down like an average humans would. We looked at the heart, the size of the heart, they stayed pretty stable. And you're seeing some that are, again, on the bottom and some that are on the top. But on the whole, as they get older, a lot of people are staying in the middle, which is what we want to see. So yay, good news. Again, our therapies are not perfect, you guys, but they're helping, right? And this one is a weird data, right? So this is, okay, how many people were going along just fine until half of them had one of those bad events happen, like a stroke or a heart thing or a kidney thing. And it took until for the men, let's see, it took till they were about 50 for the men and about 61 for the women. That's a good move, you guys. I know that doesn't sound great, like 50 is not that old, right? But it's a good move to have it happen later than it used to happen if we just had somebody with no therapy. Then you look at our, again, not the happiest part of things, but the graph of at what point were over 50% of people passing away from Fabry disease over this 20-year period. And what you found is that that with the women who were treated, 6% of them passed away, and they were between the ages of 26 and 79. Oh, sorry, that's the men. And they were on average 60 years old. Now, you may say at 60 years old, that's much too young. But remember, these are people who had started therapy when they were sick, or they started therapy newer. Like they've been on therapy for 20 years. And so that tells us that this category is a mixed bag. But 60 is a lot better than the 40 we used to hear. We need to do better, but it's better. And then for women, it was 69.9, 70. Still too young, but better than it used to be. So what this told us is that in this data, looking at anybody, all comers who had been on Replagal, on average, people were living longer than they used to without therapy. Work to be done, but that was good news. Speaking about our enzyme replacement therapy, Chiesi had a study that was every 2 weeks with therapy. This is the long-term outcomes from it. Things, as we saw, were nice and stable, which is what we want when somebody's been on therapy. There's a kid study coming down the road for therapy. I'm moving faster now because we're running out of time. Um, and there's a poster that won, and he got to give a presentation on, he was looking for using AI, better enzymes. And so just letting you know that this is something that's going on. People are looking for enzymes that don't affect the immune system so much, but are still really effective overall. It is not anywhere near humans yet, but it was just an interesting way for him to look at all the different proteins that are out there and find a better. Substrate reduction therapy, this is the superhighway. We're going to take the surface streets. The lucerastat study, which some of you may have been in, finally gave us some data. They missed their endpoint, which was, did they decrease pain as much as they wanted to? The answer was no, they did not. But I think that's a function of how pain works in Fabry disease. It doesn't stay the same. It moves up and down. There's different reasons people have pain. But what they did find is improvements in the kidneys. So when they did kidney biopsies of people who had storage after they did lucerastat for these 42 months, they didn't have storage in there anymore. So that was good enough for them to do a couple more studies. And the FDA said, keep going, you got this, which is better than too bad, not being able to do it. And one of the reasons we care is because substrate reduction therapy is a pill. So it'd be nice to have a pill option, and it doesn't depend on your mutation. Similar story for Sanofi's substrate reduction therapy. It is in the middle of a study, two studies, one that's looking at the heart and one that's looking at pain. It did not decrease pain more than the placebo. Again, complicated Fabry pain. You'd think we learned by now not to use pain as an endpoint, but it seems to be doing other stuff that is good. So they're going to keep on with that study. They're going to keep on with the heart study, and we'll see what happens next year. This year, they just said, we missed the pain endpoint. We're like, okay, thanks. Gene therapy, the superstar, right? This is our magic butterfly that we've been trying to get forever. Remember, there's two ways of doing that, more than two, but two main ones that are currently available in Fabry or being looked at. One of them is taking cells out of your body, transforming them, and then putting them back in after you dampen the immune system. We call that lentivirus. That's the one that was done in Canada over with Dr. Neal. And then there's one where we give a one-time infusion, and you inject these viruses that are no longer bad or infectious, and they go infect your liver cells, and they spurt a little circle of DNA that makes your cells into a little enzyme factory. And so your liver makes all of these enzymes because of this DNA that doesn't connect with your DNA. It just lives in the cell too. And so what's a little bit different about this is that all these measurements are the same, but we're also looking for alpha-gal to go up without any other therapy. So gene therapy has this big measurement that makes the most sense in the world. The FACT study was the Neal study that was looking at that lentivirus where you take the cells out and then you transform them and you put them back in to make enzyme on their own. This is the data that was 5 years of therapy. The alpha-gal levels had increased long-term. Those GB3s were decreased. And when they looked at the heart, even looking at the same person who got the gene therapy before and after therapy, their LVMI went down, their slope got better for their kidneys, and they had less proteinuria. And none of the people who were on this study had any of those bad events we talk about, the stroke and the kidney failure and the heart and all that stuff. They took that data and they compared it to that registry data from the Canadian Fabry Disease Registry, and the people who did the gene therapy did better. So there you go. And this is what the meeting looks like when you got Dr. West up there. This is my bird's eye view on him getting this done. There were 3 talks in Sangamo's drug. So this is one where you do the injection and it goes and makes the liver into little factory cells. And its name is ST920 right now. I know it's not a great name. Someday it'll have another name. And hopefully that'll actually happen in the next year. Because the data they showed us is that even people who'd been on enzyme or off enzyme, this is the people who'd never been on enzyme, their enzyme went way up. See that blue bar on the graph? That's people, like average people's enzyme, right? So that's like my enzyme is in that blue bar. Their enzyme was below the blue bar, and now it is above the blue bar, and occasionally dipping all over the place. I don't know why the enzyme's going up and down. They don't know why the enzyme is going up and down, but in almost every case, it is well above the blue bar the whole time. Yay! That's a one-time infusion. The lyso levels went down, and then they stayed down, not getting 0, because once you're an adult, your lysol levels are probably never going to hit zero ever again. But the kids do. And that's how we know starting earlier is a little better there. Went down nicely. So that's if you're never on therapy. For people who'd been on therapy, their enzyme levels went up too, way up. And you can see that some people went way up. They had to even change the graph because they went up so high. And then they all were below normal, except for one person you see there down beneath the blue bar. It didn't work for that person. And this is multiple doses, and so that's not a dose that they're using. They're using higher doses. The lyso, you can see they went down, except for that guy. You can see how his enzyme didn't go up. Well, his lyso levels did. So that just shows you that when the therapy is not working, you can watch those lyso go up like that. See, that's like a steep curve up instead of this wiggly waggly thing. There you go. But also, really excitingly, not only did their kidney function move back to like what an average humans would be, it improved on average. That's a big deal. Such a big deal that they, in fact, are now submitting their data on a rolling basis to the FDA. And the FDA is going to look at that, and they'll decide at that point if they consider this safe and effective and should be available to everybody outside of a study. And that's hopefully going to happen over the next year. So let's watch what happens with them. It's also important to know that even though they didn't give any steroids or things ahead of time, the reaction that people had were pretty minor. One of the things we worry about gene therapy is a massive immune reaction that leads to horrible things like kidney failure and death. And they did not see that in the people that they did, either the low dose, the middle dose, or the high dose. We didn't have that. Now, did some people feel like they had the flu like a week after? Yes, they did. Did some people's blood pressure drop a little when they're in the hospital and had to get an injection of steroids and went back up? Yes, they did. Did a couple people get a fever? Yes, they did. But nobody who had to really go hang out in the hospital for any length of time because of this. But more importantly to me, I want you to look at that green stuff. That green stuff is everybody who, before they started, they were on enzyme, all of them. Well, no, a couple of them weren't on enzyme. But that green is where their questionnaires, when they answered them, those things that's hard to measure. That's what we're trying to measure here. And look how far out that blue line is just from getting that one infusion. Now, of course, these are the best scores as a circle, but you can see everybody had improvements in mental health and pain and energy and how they interacted with the world, which is the most exciting finding for me. People felt better. Now, is it perfect? No. You cannot get this enzyme replacement therapy if you have an antibody to the virus that injects it into your liver cells. So this is something that's going to take a lot of people out. I know this because when we were trying to get somebody in the study, a lot of people were screen failures, which means they couldn't do the study because they had antibodies to this little virus thing that we get the enzyme. That's a bummer. Unicure is another gene therapy where they inject the cells one time, the virus one time, and it carries to the liver and it puts that little circle of DNA so your liver becomes an enzyme factory. It is not as far along in development. This particular product is still trying to figure out which is the best dose. So they don't have long-term data, but they'll show you what we have. This one's name is AMT-191. Yay, what a great name. No, it'll get better someday. This study only put men in, and they had to have, the other study had men and women and people on therapy and off therapy. This study is only people who are on enzyme replacement therapy with Fabrazyme, or I guess that's alpha, or I think they took alpha and beta actually. Anyway, you had to be on enzyme replacement therapy, and it had to be one, it couldn't be Elfabrio. And they were looking at these 3 different doses, and your kidneys couldn't be so bad. But it didn't matter if you had antibodies to the vector, to that virus that carries it in there. So they didn't even test that. They did later, but not in the beginning part, just screen if you can. So if you look here, these enzyme levels for many people are even higher than the ones that we saw for the other dose, the other Sangamo product. But what's interesting here is because we're looking at 3 different doses, you can see that 2, I call it the 2 dose, the low dose, was not as much. They still, most of them hit well above normal, but that's not as high as the 6 dose or the 4 dose, right? So the 6 times 10 to the 13th, that's a lot of viral particles. That's what it's telling us. So maybe 6 is too high, 2 is too low. Maybe we need to go for a strong 4 in the middle, but that's what they're trying to figure out right now. So again, really early now. Right now they're looking at safety. Safety more than anything else. Dose and safety. But you can see here, these are just like the other graphs we're looking at, except these are the 3 different dose levels. And they're showing us that everybody who was on enzyme, their levels are stable. And I don't know what's going on with patient 11. It looks like they were not being treated well or something was happening because their enzyme went down, or the LISA went down, but they're up really high. And that's much higher than you'd want to see in somebody who's on enzyme. But you can see the difference between the medium dose, the high dose, and the low dose here. And that's individual patients, all those different lines, instead of them all together. So the bottom line, the data they presented was that there weren't any infusion reactions, so nothing when they were getting the infusion. People did have liver increases after. So they did steroids after, but after they got the steroids, they had some increases that responded to steroids. There was one person who had something possibly related, which is some changes in their inside of their brain, like inflammation, but it asymptomatic. So they didn't see it in the person, they just saw it on the MRI. And then there was someone who had chest pain and their elevated troponin went up. He had heart disease, he already had an enlarged heart, so they don't know if it's definitely the drug, but they're not going to rule it out. So again, pretty safe looking right now as well, but early days, right? They're still trying to find the dose. Nowhere near the FDA. So thank you for hanging with me as we bomb through this. But those are the things that I found from World that I thought might be useful. And now I am here and able to answer any questions. I don't have any issues with time. So what do we have to look at?
Okay, we'll open up the chat, but Dawn, like every other time, I think that you're just so engaging. You are unbelievable to listen to. So thank you for taking the time to do this for us.
Thank you, Julia, for listening to me all the time.
Yeah.
I just feel so honored that people are willing to like listen to my thoughts on this stuff.
Oh, it's so great. So great, Dawn. Good job.
Yeah,
Thank you.
such a good job. Okay, we're gonna open up the chat. I see that we've had a little bit of conversation here. Um, how early can people start treatment with kids, especially?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
that's a great question. I myself have started them as early as 2. They get a port, and it had more to do with the fact that the kid was already having some decreased sweating and had some pain already, some of the neuropathic pain. So we've started a couple kids at 2. There is a family that had twins, and they were picked up from newborn screening, and they started when they were 8 months old. So you can start at any age. In other lysosomal storage diseases, like our cousin diseases, some of them we start like as soon as we can. So the first months of life. I am not convinced we have to start in the first months of life. I think we may need to start at 2, 3, 4, depending on the change in the gene and the symptoms the child's having and what we need to think about from the family history. But you can start really early. Uh, so that's my thoughts there.
Thank you. We have a few that were part of the FACT study, so thank you for saying that. That's great work. Does all this info you presented to us get to our geneticists? I find when talking to my geneticists, they always seem to say nothing really is in the works.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a cutoff, right? So your geneticist may be like, there's nothing that's currently in front of the FDA that's really close to being ready for us. Or your geneticist may be like, okay, maybe my cutoff is there anything in clinical trials? This information only gets presented to you if you go to World and you learn about it. That's the only way you find out. Or if there's some piece of it that's picked up and is available like in studies. So some of the studies I showed you, like the one with Repligal in 20 years, that's a published article. So if your geneticist was interested, they could go look it up. But I think part of the problem is that sometimes you got to tell your geneticist what you want to hear about. If you just want to hear about things that are close to approval, tell them that. If you want to hear about like, I heard from this webinar that they're working on substrate reduction therapies that are pills. What can you tell me about that? Then they might give you more because not everybody wants all the stuff that's not that close, right? Because right now the substrate reduction therapies, I think we're still looking at 5 years, 4 years, 3 years. We're a ways out for that one. And so they may not talk about that. But again, it also depends on how curious your geneticist is to find this information. I am so specialized that I will absorb all the Fabry information I can find all day long, but I have that luxury Other people do not have that luxury, and they depend on people like me who just happen to like give a lecture that they get to see or something like that. We have a meeting called the American College of Medical Genetics meeting that's going to happen in March. And this stuff is probably not going to be there. There may be a couple pieces of it that'll be there, but it will not be many of them. So in order to get an in-depth dive like you guys have now, you can send them this lecture and be like, listen to this. Or maybe you can tell them that you're really excited about learning about some piece of this and ask them to do a little research too, because they can find most of this. The only downfall is that the abstracts for this meeting are published, but they're behind a firewall. So you have to have an institution that has access to it. And mine does not, believe it or not. So it's a little bit more locked down than some of the information that's easier to. And there's like 100 pages of abstracts, so they have to know what they're looking for. So my long-winded answer is, it's not that they don't want to know, but sometimes it's hard to get there. And then you got to tell them what you want to hear too.
That's good stuff, Dawn. I think you made a good point of saying when you walk in and when you're having this conversation with your physician to ask the specific question. And maybe that's more helpful to get the answer that you're looking for and the right information. Rasha, you said you have classic Fabry disease. You live in Canada. You're on Replagal. You are not aware that your lyso-Gb3 or GB3 is regularly measured. Is this the experience of others?
Yeah, so just from my perspective, is a lot of times people don't realize that it's happening. So if you give a green top tube, right, got one right here, because my patient didn't show up today. If you see this green top tube, you are probably getting your GL3 measured. There's not many other things that we use this for other than enzyme, and nobody's going to be measuring your enzyme right now because we already know your enzyme levels. So if you see this, and the antibodies are measured by a gold top tube or one of the tubes that has like gunk in the middle, right? If you look at something that's got gunk in the bottom, they're measuring your antibodies. Now, I have to say that, we don't always call you with those results, which is interesting, right? Because some people are not interested. I tend to try to, you can print them out if you're part of one of the registries and show people how they've changed over time or not changed over time. So I like to do that. But you want to make sure that if you're not getting it done, then you can ask for them. I don't know about in Canada. In the US, if we do the testing through LabCorp, it's free. It doesn't hit anybody's out of pocket or insurance or anything. So that's how we get all of our testing done. But you've got some amazing labs in Canada, and I don't know if they access to the same program that we do here.
I do think that I don't think there's any cost to the patient that I'm aware of, but I do think that there's a few, most clinics in Canada are regularly testing, but there are a few that are not. And so you can specifically ask for that test.
Yeah. And generally you do it once a year. When you're starting a new treatment or switching treatment, we like to do it every 3 months, which usually turns to every 6 months. But every year is what we really want to do, if nothing else.
Rasha, where in Canada are you located?
Toronto.
Toronto. Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, definitely ask them. Be like, hey, are you measuring my GL3s? People love lyso-Gb3 a little bit better than regular GB3 these days. That has more to do with just the fact that lyso-Gb3 appears to be more specific, but it also appears to be poison. So it's basically like causing more inflammation. So that's why we care more about lyso-Gb3.
Oh, I see.
Mhm.
Any more questions for Dawn?
Yeah, I can pull up the chat too. Let me see what I can find here. Oh, Scott, you asked about gene therapy. The thing about gene therapy is that when it's in studies, you have to have meet all these different rules, like all these different health rules before you can be in a study. And if you meet them, then yay, you can be in the study if it's happening, somewhere where you are. Usually they pay for travel if you need to travel for it. But until it gets through the regulatory authorities, then it's not available to everybody. And even when it makes it through the regulatory authorities, I think they're going to put some rules around it. Like, we believe it should be for these people or those people, like men with classic Fabry disease or women and men with classic Fabry disease. Or usually it's going to be over 18, right? And then it depends on how things are going to be covered, right? It's going to be $1 million treatment. So who's going to pay for that? In the US, we've got some gene therapies and they're covered by insurance. Um, but how does that happen when you're working with something like Health Canada where you've got, a certain pot of money, right? But at the same time, if you do enzyme replacement therapy for 5 years, then it's about the same as getting gene therapy 1 dose, right? So we'll just have to see what happens. We're Fabry is going to be a test case for gene therapy when it gets approved in the States, and we'll see what happens with other countries and other places too. So most accessible right now is making sure that your doctor that takes care of you knows that you want to be in a study for gene therapy. If you do, you may not want to. Like gene therapy studies, you guys are like the riskiest of the risky, and they're very annoying. Like, got to get blood drawn all the time. And there's one point where we have to figure out if all the vector, so the virus is out of your body. So you got to give a saliva sample, a pee sample, a poop sample, a blood sample, and a semen sample if you're a man. So, these are things that are not for the faint of heart, right? It's a lot of work and it takes a lot of time. So if you don't want to be part of a study, then you got to wait till somewhere a regulatory agency makes it happen and then hope you're part of it. If you want to be in a study, you have to make it known. You got to reach out to a lot of people and tell them you want to do it.
I thought what you talked about with with the valves was really important.
Yes.
And I just want to make sure that I got that right. That is cardiac MRI the only way to watch the progression of that?
You can see it on echo, but it's not very sensitive. So when I was actually doing that poster, I did a timeline and I looked at the echo and what the readings were on the echo. And then she had a couple cardiac MRIs, and I could see that things worsened a lot on the echo and it didn't show a difference. But when you looked at the cardiac MRI, you saw the difference. So I think that we're getting caught off guards because the echo is just not as sensitive and the MRI is much more sensitive. And there was a lot of things that, someone had an echo in the same year they had a cardiac MRI, so I could compare them. And there are a lot of things that were called out as not changing on the echo, but on the MRI they were, like significant changes. I was like, ooh, that's not good. Makes me want to MRI everybody, but it doesn't happen. Like I can't get a lot of people MRIs because it's a more invasive test and insurance won't cover it or whatever. In a perfect world, we do MRIs like every couple years and it would pick it up, but it's not always available. It's not always covered. So good point. Good point. And it's not, I would have to say that I have only seen this in my people who started therapy later when they already had moderate disease or severe disease. Now, it doesn't mean it won't happen in other people, but it's really been something I've seen more as people are like over 50 and started therapy later in life. We'll see how that pans out. It's just what I've seen so far, right? Because my patients are older, because I'm older, so we're all older together. Let's see. They're having babies and grandbabies. I love it. See, Tetsuya. Yeah. So the work that is being done, that was done with that lentivirus gene therapy, Glafabra is trying to resurrect in that hopefully, they can figure out a good way. The reason that we like the lentivirus idea is because you can give it multiple times. So generally our AAV, once you've gotten that gene therapy, then your immune system knows about it and you don't want to give it another time. People are working on trying to figure that out, but generally you think of AAV as being a one-time gene therapy. Maybe you could do a different vector at some point, but generally, but lentivirus you could have like boosters of, right? So you could do it once and down the road you could do it again. Not that it's easy though, because you're dampening your immune system, but the thought is that that is a nice option to have out there. If you looked at those graphs, you could see there was one person who didn't respond to the AAV gene therapy. They could theoretically, if it was available, try the lentivirus in a way that they wouldn't be able to necessarily try all those other types of gene therapies. So, welcome, Tetsu. Scott, look at you, rock star. Did you want to comment on that experience at all? Is it fun to see the data that you worked so hard to give us? Feel free to unmute if you're available. I don't know if you can. You don't have to share, but thank you for your service. That's a big deal. As I mentioned, gene therapy studies are a pain in the butt.
Thank you, Scott. And I think we have a few others who we say thank you to as well on here.
Thank you, anybody who did that. That's a big deal. It's a huge deal. I always like, we couldn't get to where we are without people basically becoming guinea pigs and donating their body, right?
Yep.
Again, all those samples I told you about, right? Oh, okay. I think that might be it. Oh, Eve had a good question that's all for you, Julia. A few years ago, I heard that it's harder to get approved to start ERT in Canada than the US. Is that still true?
Yeah, so it is still true, I would say. So in Canada, we have to meet a criteria of burden of disease. You can find the criteria on garrod.com, and you go to Garrod and you can see the criteria that, so when you go to your doctor and you're having symptoms, they actually have a checklist, and then they would fill out that checklist and submit that to the CFDI. And the CFDI is the panel that then looks at that, and they will see if you're eligible for treatment in Canada. So in the US, how Dawn was saying that they start much earlier, it is different.
Any other comments or thoughts you guys have? I'm going to another meeting and hopefully Julia will get to come too. It's and Jack too. It's an expert Fabre meeting that happens in Italy this year. And it's going to be all like next level Fabre stuff. And so I'm very excited to see what they have to tell us too, because that's the meeting. It usually has a theme about something that's really important in Fabre. So one year it was why lyso GB3 is such an issue. Another year was why is inflammation something we really have to watch out for? And we're still working on the inflammation. One of them was like, we need to think about antibodies and immune systems a little bit more. So I feel like every time it brings up a really hot topic that we need to learn more about. Mm-hmm. Looks like the bottom.
Thank you so much, Don.
Thank you guys. Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you, Dawn, as
Thank you,
always.
Dawn.
Thanks. Thanks for spending your nighttime with me.
Yeah, thank you to everyone for being here. Dawn, thank you so much. And we'll be in touch. Always such a great talk. And it's so wonderful to hear all these updates. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks.
Thank you, Dawn.
You're welcome. Thanks, guys.
Night all.
Bye,
Thank
Dawn.
you.
Bye.
Always great to hear you
Bye-bye.
speak, Don.
It's you.
Okay.